Hello, what you're looking at here is the very early beginnings of a new project I'm working on. It's a game. Um, the basis of it is there's a simulator that's simulating a quite complex machine, a war machine, and the crew of 5 each have a role in managing the various systems of it. And they all work together under a commander who has no control of his or her own, but just manages everyone else to make things happen. So I've done some work on the of simulating the power plant. So you can see here each chunk has got a reactor, a radiator, and a capacitor. So this is the simulator ticking over. So the reactor generates power, everything generates heat, except for the radiator, which exhausts the heat, but it pulls the heat out of the various components. At present, I've just got a reactor, a radiator, and a capacitor. So capacitor stores power that the reactor produces, and in this case the radiator is drawing power from the capacitor, and the capacitor is drawing power from the reactor, and the radiator is cooling the reactor and the capacitor. So it's a fairly, there's a lot of interdependencies here. You can see here that the heat in the capacitor is going down and down and down. So there's an upper and a lower limit for the temperature of a component. So if it gets too hot, it blows up. If it gets too cold, it freezes and stops working. So the job of the engineer crewman will be to manage the various heating and cooling and reactor output and repairs necessary to keep the thing operating properly. Other roles that I've got in mind, there'd be a navigator who'd handle locomotion, moving around. The commander who has no direct control but just directs everybody else. The sensor guy or the recon, he's in charge of, he or she's in charge of operating the sensor suite to scan the environment, to pick up targets and report them to the commander. And the gunner, who receives instructions from the commander and then plugs in the heading and the range and what type of weapon he wants to use. And then, the engineer's got to make sure that he or she's providing enough power to the sensor guy so he can do his scan, and providing enough power to the weapons so they can charge up and fire. And the weapons guy's got to keep an eye on his heat generated, all that stuff. So everybody depends on everybody else. You can see here in the simulator the capacitor is now taking damage because it filled up. So power capacity 100, and it's actually storing more than it can. So it's generating excess heat as a result, and so the radiator's unable to keep up with the heat generated. So the problem here is that the radiator isn't doing enough cooling. So let me just stop the simulator for a sec and change the cooling up a bit. There we go. So it'll take a while to get back into that state, but now we're doing more cooling, so we'll have less of a problem with heat buildup. So that's the kind of problem that the engineer will have to solve, like balancing, making sure stuff doesn't get too hot or too cold, or make sure there's enough power but not too much power. Otherwise, your capacitors start to overload and generate more heat, which is bad for everyone. So it's very, very early days yet, but I'm thinking of making all the interaction with the game via typing commands into a console. So each player will have a graphical representation of all the gauges and dials and displays that are necessary to do their job, and then a text entry box where they can type in commands. It's just very satisfying to rapidly type in commands and have cool stuff happen as a result. Like for right now, like, oh no, our reactor's about to get really cold. So let's turn down our cooling, and then maybe our reactor won't get so cold so quickly. That's the kind of problem that they'll need to solve on the fly to keep their thing operating well. So I've lowered the cooling capacity a bit too far, and so now we've got a heat build-up in our reactor, but our capacitor is still cooling down. So you can reallocate where your cooling flows and where your power flows, and that's what will keep the engineer busy. All right. Bye bye.